Again, I'm Per, the founder of PasswordsCon. Really nice to have so many people in the room and back here. Whenever I do PasswordsCon, and I've been doing this since 2010 in Europe and in the States, I always look for new talks, new speakers, new content. But I am also very interested in having new perspectives on old stuff and also repeating old stuff. I don't care if your presentation has been done many times before, because with this audience, there is always something new to learn, both for speakers and for the audience. So if you have something that you think could be a great idea for a talk, feel free to reach out to me. I really love helping people, trying to come up with good talks, good content. And most probably you are working or you're studying something that I take a keen interest in, and I would love to hear more about it. So please reach out. And also when it comes to passwords, one of the most common feedback I get from people whenever they attend is that they never had any idea that the topic of passwords, which sounds so incredibly narrow, can actually be so incredibly wide. I've had psychologists at PasswordsCon talking about how your brain works in terms of short-term, mid-term, and long-term memory. I've had linguists talk about, well, how languages are constructed and how they work. I've had Johan Dahmen, the inventor of AES encryption and the SHA-3 algorithm, explain how that stuff works, and I still have absolutely no clue how that works. I've had the author of Hashcat introduce Hashcat and how he optimized the SHA-1 function, and lots more content. But now, I will introduce BSidesLV from Twitter, talk about secrets of the second factor, and not to scare you off, but this is one of those topics that, to me, is new and that I've been waiting for somebody to submit, and I'm looking forward to this one. So take it away.
All right. All right, thank you. This is Secrets of the Second Factor. I originally wrote this talk in November 2019, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to go take it everywhere in 2020. This is going to be a great year for me, and then stuff. I did do it a couple of times virtually in 2020 at some kind of smaller conferences. I did do it at the Diana Initiative. I have updated the content since then, so you're not getting a totally recycled talk here, but you might have seen it before. I'm going to level set and give you some expectations. Sometimes when you read an abstract, you don't quite get the full idea of what you're about to get into. So first off, this is not about installing it. This is not saying like, hey, you should really have a two-factor system. I'm kind of already assuming that you've done it already. So it's not going to be about that. There's plenty of other talks that will explain to you why you need a two-factor system. This is going to be about organizational security. It's not going to be about your personal security. It's going to be like, are you defending an organization or a large company? And then the last piece of those two things aren't super interesting to you. It will be about threat modeling and threat hunting. So there might be some tidbits and some techniques that you can pick up there. Who am I? Kind of already mentioned, I go by BSidesLV on Twitter, and my day job is a threat hunter and incident response investigator. So that's where a lot of these stories come from. Some of my other stories come from my nights and weekends as a hack coordinator. I work on BSidesRDU, I work on KakalakiCon, and I work on DEF CON 919. All of that is out in the North Carolina area, really big in the community there. And then I say that I'm the expert only in one room. So I'm the expert at my company, and I always try to go out into a bigger room so I can meet other experts and teach other people so that we have more than one expert in the room. And then I am a certified Duo administrator, and then I just want to call out that there's no commission. I do kind of heavily rely on Duo in this talk as the MFA system. I have dabbled a little bit into Okta and Microsoft and some of the other ones, but not as heavily as Duo, so a lot of my examples are with that system. And I just use it because it's convenient, because that's what I'm able to use on a day-to-day basis. So a little bit more about what this talk is about. I'm going to very quickly go over MFA 101, like what is it, if you don't know the details of it. I'm going to go over what they tell you, like when you first get an MFA system, or what most of the MFA talks are about, or like what salespeople will tell you. I'm going to get into what they don't tell you, and then we're going to go threat hunting, and that's the really great part. And then I'll give you some conclusions and some actions that you can do if you are with a corporation and if you do have an MFA system, like what you can do on Monday or whenever it is you get back to work and what you can action. So just really briefly, MFA 101, for the purposes of this talk, we're talking about it after the password is correct. So you've entered your username, password, and then you're presented with a second factor or the multi-factor. There are some systems that will allow you to enter a code in line with the password, but that's not in the scope of this. And then for the scope of this, we're also dealing with phone call, SMS messages, and phone apps. We're not dealing with sending an email to a user and giving them a code that way. I'm not going to be talking about DigiKeys or YubiKeys or one-time passwords very much. They do come up, but it's not the bulk of this talk. And then I'm going to give you a minute to look at this diagram while I take a drink. Kind of the basic flow, the first factor, and then doing content checks and things like that. So diving into what they tell you, for the MFA threat model, most of what they tell you is that it's going to be for prevention and mitigation. Prevention, getting into an account. This is a nice chart from Google. It's all pretty about all the different ways that hey, MFA will prevent an account from getting taken over based on the different factors and things that you can have. And then they also talk about the problems that are mitigated. Things like if you have a password policy that isn't great, or you have users that maybe do some malicious compliance. I was at another conference one time, and one of the speakers was talking about they had a policy where you couldn't use the previous 15 passwords every time they changed it. So they changed it exactly 16 times to put it back to their original password. Malicious compliance. So two-factor might help with that. And then things like phishing and credential harvesters, and I throw some caveats on there to a certain degree, an MFA system will mitigate those problems. Now let's dive into some of the things that they don't tell you and some of the things that you might not have heard of before. Problems persist. Things like brute force. Brute force is still a thing in an MFA system. You have the brute force against the password, and then after you have that, continuously sending pushes or continuously attempting the 6-digit code that would be sent over SMS in order to try to brute force into an account. You still have things like social engineering, calling somebody up and then with whatever pretext you have, requesting that code in order to bypass the MFA and get in that way. And then you still have man in the middle and credential harvesting, still spoofing websites or spoofing permissions. And then some of the credential harvesters now are getting a lot better where they're actually requesting that second factor code as well and then turning around and using it. And then one of the other problems that a lot of people don't think about is account recovery. So you have a password reset flow. What is now your MFA flow? If your user loses their phone, if they lose their phone number, how do you get them back into account recovery and setting that up? Another thing is with more factors, you also get more problems. There's a lot of false sense of security where, hey, we have an MFA system, we should be fine. That lovely chart by Google that I showed earlier said that we're cool. So you kind of get lulled into maybe more sense of security than you should have. It can also be used if a attacker gets a password dump and they get a whole bunch of passwords. It can be used for password validation. So they enter in the password, they get the prompt for the multi-factor. Now they see that, hey, that password was correct. And if that password was correct, is the rest of the dump correct? And then they see that that screen for the MFA system. They can now go do more recon on that MFA system and try to find bypasses around it, build their pretexts better. Another thing is application implementation. Passwords have been around a lot longer than MFA, so hopefully your application people know how to tie into those systems and have the code and everything to do and set that up correctly. Some of the MFA systems are a little bit newer, and if you don't have very specific code to give to your application developers in order to hook into everything the way that they should be, there's always misconfigurations in applications that can kind of bypass or have workarounds in the MFA system so that they can bypass it that way. And then I bring up the human factor, and humans are bad at passwords. Entire conference track dedicated to that. But also, it's amazing what I've seen in my research how humans are not good with multi-factor. Oh my gosh, I have to get this code and punch it in. That's so much extra work. That that psychological acceptability where they will do things, maybe not maliciously, but just to like get their job done and find bypasses and ways around multi-factor. So I'm going to get into some of the configuration threats. When I first started looking into MFA systems and MFA logs, I'm a blue teamer. I asked some red teamers like, hey, what do you do if you're on an engagement and you find an MFA system is set up? And they were telling me that they love the engagements where they're just very first rolling out a brand new MFA system, and they have enrollment after the password is correct. So you've never used MFA before, you enter your username, password, and it prompts you, hey, give me your phone so I can set up MFA for you. If the red teamer has gone out and gotten the password already, they then add their red team phone to that account, find the person on vacation who hasn't set it up yet or is a little bit behind. They now have their red team phone on that account and just go all the way through the MFA system. The other thing with that is open self-service device enrollment. This is just allowing your users to add any device to their account, like they can free add a one-time password device, or they can add another phone or add another phone number to their account instead of going through something like IT. That can you can also kind of see how that would create problems if you were able to get a push the first time as a red teamer or an attacker, and then being able to add your attack phone or your red team phone after the fact without having to go through any sort of checks or balances with IT. So one of the other things that they don't tell you about an MFA system is basic baselining things. So we've talked about how you probably have a very explicit password policy that says you have to rotate it, every so many days. You have to have so many special characters, numbers, length, and all that. Do you have an explicit established policy about your MFA system? Are you limiting how many phones they can add? What type of phones they can add? Are you doing BYOD? Can it only be corporate phones? Who is issuing that? And things of that nature. Another thing you want to think about is like implicit best practices. Best practices for a password, best practices for an MFA system. The other thing that you kind of want to baseline with is your application teams that are going to be helping you set this up, and then your IT team, any sort of tech support that is going to have to go along with a rollout or day-to-day operations of helping users that are running and using the MFA system. And then the other thing that you want to baseline is going out and doing test scenarios in a lab, just running through the MFA system yourself through any sort of weird scenarios that you can think of, and then taking a look at those logs and establishing those baselines. Take a minute to drink here real quick. Beep. Okay, so is that better? Okay, sorry, I wasn't close enough there. So one of the biggest things that they don't tell you is that there are logs. These systems log quite a bit of information. And then the other thing that they don't tell you is that you want to bring along more data when you go look at these logs. And I love logs. I love getting into it. And why do the logs tell me things? I am like the log lady. Give me all of the logs, upgrade the logs, just bring them all to me because the logs tell me so much. They've told me lots of things, and now I'm going to tell you what they told me so that now you can go throughout Hunt and take a look in your logs. So I'm going to break all of this down. The first thing that we're going to take a look at is the access device. This gives us some interesting information like the client OS and the browser that your users are using to log into your system. On some of these systems, they will also have an endpoint client, so you can get some additional endpoint details. So here we can see that they have a firewall enabled. Hey, they don't have Java, that's great, or Flash. That's also great that they don't have that installed and they're running Windows Defender and things like that. Some of the stuff that you want to bring along to these logs are things like your asset inventory, because you have an asset inventory. Everybody has an asset inventory. Those are hard. You want to bring a list of your approved software. Do you allow users to run Firefox? Do you allow them to run like Brave or other different browsers like that? And then one of the other things, caveats to this is remember that there is agent string spoofing. If they're logging into web apps, they can be spoofing those agent strings depending on how the system gathers that data. And then you also have browser-based apps. So if you have a user and you're questioning their login, they might not understand what it is they were even logging into, depending on how it displays in these logs. So the thing that we're going to threat hunt in this is we're going to take a look at non-issued or approved operating systems. So you run an all Windows shop and you start to see Macintosh logins or you start to see Linux logins, you might want to take a closer look at those. Also taking a look at old or end-of-life OS versions. It was very surprising to me when I went hunting in my own environment, seeing a lot of Windows 7 computers. I thought we had gotten rid of all of those, but they're still logging in, and like, where are they and what are they doing? And then you want to take a look for like restricted software. Here we see Windows Defender, but maybe you have a corporate license from McAfee or another vendor. Why are they running Windows Defender instead of what you rolled out to the whole fleet? So take a look at those. The next thing we're going to look at is the access device IP address. Like where are they logging in from? So IP address of the accessing device, the location is based on IP address lookups. And then some of the logs will actually give you a DNS lookup or the ASN, so you kind of know what company, like what ISP they're using to log in. Some of the additional information you want to bring along with that is your known corporate subnets. Are you taking a look at users that are on site or have VPN'd into your system and then are going out to the web in order to get their MFA call? Should they be going through that? Should it be split tunneling? Where are they allowed to come in through? You want a list of acceptable access locations, depending on your industry or your company. There might be certain locations where you don't want anybody logging in from. And then you might also want to have an employee directory, employee asset inventory again. Yes, you have asset inventory. Employee location data, so you can kind of have an idea of where people should be. And then a big caveat here is IP locations can be wrong. And it also varies by config and application, like I was saying before, VPN or coming through like your corporate network and bouncing out. The IP locations can be wrong. I used to work for an ISP. I was doing a packet capture on a firewall that I knew was in New York City for a customer. They were complaining that one of the partners that they were trying to set up a VPN tunnel with was saying that their IPs were located in Puerto Rico. Packet capture on a New York City firewall, I knew that it wasn't in Puerto Rico, but the IP location service that their third party was using had some stale data in it. They had to go through and like use a different service in order to realize like, hey, the IP locations, they can be wrong. So you want to cross-reference. If you see scary location, go just double check it before you start chasing it too hard. So let's go hunting in this. And what we're going to take a look at is Tor IPs or unapproved VPN IPs. It's amazing how many people will like go use a personal VPN, maybe watch some Netflix for a different country or something, and then try to log into your corporate network, totally forgetting that they're in a country that you don't allow. Kind of interesting when you see the Tor nodes trying to connect into your corporate stuff. And then any sort of ASNs that you might have on a list. And then here's also where you can use your threat intel IOC IPs and ASNs if you're getting any sort of threat intel feeds. And if other people have seen malicious activity from IP addresses, go hunt for those IPs if they're trying to log into your system. And then you can also hunt the IP locations with just that caveat that I mentioned before. It has a little bit higher rate of false positives or benigns where just know that you have to do a lot of extra or a couple of extra cross checks there before you go chasing that too far. The next part here is the application logs. So we're taking a look at the application name and the application ID. The other thing you want to bring along is application inventory. I'm very big on inventory micromanagement, end game of everything. So you also want to bring along the application logs. Just because a user was able to log in, first factor, second factor, did the application kick them out, or do they even have permissions to log into that application? You want to have those logs to follow up on that. And then a lot of these, some of the vendors will have integrations with other major vendors and can like auto-detect like, oh, you're using that application. Other times it's your IT or whoever is configuring your MFA system is labeling those. So, hey, you labeled this application website. Thank you. I know exactly what the user got into there to follow up on that. Or application level config. I think I mentioned that before, that applications can be configured wrong or they're not actually allowing the user in. So just take a look at those. What we're going to threat hunt in this data, we're going to be taking a look at absence over time. keeping an eye on reports. How often do people log into certain applications, and has that number started to drop off recently or dropped off completely? You know, is there an application configuration where maybe it's not hitting the MFA system like it should? And then you also want to do application log follow-up. I've mentioned that before. It's getting a inventory of application logs and being able to follow up on those is really, really important. And then the next piece here is going to be the factor that's used, what kind of factor, results of that factor, and the reasons for that factor. So here we see that there's a push that's sending out to a application on your phone. The result was a success, and it's a success because the user approved it. You also want to bring along your first factor logs. If you see a bunch of failures, like you're seeing a brute force, was the password brute forced first, and now they're brute forcing the MFA system? You also want to bring along help desk tickets. A lot of times you'll see weird going on, and then you look up help desk tickets for that user, and it's like, hey, they were just having a bad day. They couldn't get their phone to work. They couldn't get the push to work or whatever. And then just remember defense in depth. Success here does not always mean success in the application. And we're actually going to deep dive a little bit further into these. I have some good examples here. So brute force, we'll dive into this. We're going to verify this was a benign hit. Because if you kind of take a look at this, a little bit interesting. When we break down those 5 individual hits, the logins appear to have completely random timing. There's no real pattern there. We have a successful login after the failures. We're going to talk to Ivan's manager, and we're taking a look specifically at, we have that asset inventory, so we know that Ivan has a mobile phone. We know Ivan has a work phone and those approved numbers. Looking at that authentication device, that's kind of weird. He has a 91, which is the country code for India, where 919 is the local area code for RTP. So that's kind of odd that he added a phone number for India there to his account, because we have open self-service adding devices turned on. So we're going to talk to his manager, and it turns out, hey, he typoed his desk phone number. He thought he had to press 91 to get out of the system, and ended up coding that into his authentication methods. So we're just going to, and then also his mobile phone was on silent, and that's why the push messages were on fail, or were failing and not being answered. So we're going to go in and we're going to fix that for him and get rid of that phone for him, and that was pretty benign. The next one here, we're going to investigate a little bit further. Oh, we don't have asset inventory. We have no idea what Faith's phone number should be. That's very sad. We also have no idea where she should be located. So are those logins weird or not? We have no idea. Is that phone number weird? We have no idea. We see that we have a high count of failed logins, so we have 27. Let's take a look at those a little bit closer. It turns out that those login attempts are exactly 5 minutes apart to the second. So that's a bit odd. We do have an asset inventory for the laptop, though, and we see that Faith was issued a Mac OS at this company. We have a Windows system logging in. So again, that's odd. So let's go ahead and talk to Faith's manager. She's on vacation. This is great. So we're just going to go ahead and disable Faith's account until she returns, and then we're going to reissue her a new password so that the attempts against the second factor are going to stop. Disable the account just in case she decides to click accept on one of those pushes that keep coming through in that brute force. And then we're going to go ahead and follow up and do further investigation on those login attempts. We had a correct password. How did that correct password get leaked out? And do further investigation on that, see if there were any users or anything. The next one I'm going to talk about is suspicious login reporting. A lot of people that I've talked to actually didn't know that this was a thing, where you can have users actually report in if they see a suspicious or fraudulent login. You get a push. You can say, hey, that was weird. I deny that, and then I'm reporting that as fraud. Same thing with a phone call factor. Calling in, you can press one number to accept it and a different number to report it as fraud. I love this because it allows users to actively report weird things that they see in the environment, setting up another detection method for you. This happens with the push or the phone call options. Can't really do it with an SMS or anything like that. And then you have to educate the users. They have to know that it exists. They have to know that it's there in order for them to be able to push that button and let you know. Also want to give them some information, maybe to your incident response team, like after you push the button, could you please email us and tell us if you saw anything else weird going on or just how to get in contact with that. So we're going to take a look at some suspicious login reports, some logs here. We're going to verify Benign again here with Ivan. The first thing that you'll notice is that his auth device matches his mobile on file. And this is pretty much always going to happen. It's going to be the original user's phone that is reporting fraud. If you're a red teamer or an attacker, why are you reporting the authentication as fraud? Probably not going to happen. That's a bad attack if it does. I'm going to take a look here, and the access IP matches the authentication IP. So that means that both the phone that we're sending the push out to is in the same location, enough that it's at least going out through the same router, getting the same IP address and everything as the access device, which could be a laptop or could be a different device. So we're taking a look here a little bit more into Ivan himself, and his Outlook status says that he's traveling. That's interesting. Let's talk to Ivan's manager. Why did he report fraud? Since he's out, we can't really talk to him directly. So it turns out that Ivan saw this really cool talk at BSides Las Vegas and got all excited about fraud reports and decided to sit around the bar and take some bets. And it turns out he was showing off how fast his incident response team will respond to a fraud report. So my company's faster than yours. So we're going to verify that Benign and please don't do that. I'm going to take another drink here. Yes, yes, the IR team gets a percentage of the winnings for responding so quickly. So this next one we're going to investigate a little bit more. Faith is back. And the asset inventory shows, again, that Faith was issued a macOS and we have a Windows device logging in. We learned our lesson from the brute force and now have her phone number on file, so we can take a look at that. It turns out Faith, we talked to Faith's manager. Turns out Faith is on vacation again. And we're going to go ahead and disable her account and wait until she comes back to reissue her password. And when we do further investigation, you can see that login attempts are from the same subnet as before. We talked to Faith about her password, and hey, what did you do when you changed it? She incremented it by 1. That's a different password. So pretty easy to guess again and get back into the system in order to start sending pushes. But we taught her how to report fraud this time. So instead of getting just hammered, she was able to report fraud and get the incident response team on it right away. So the next piece that we're going to take a look at are the phones themselves. So phone number or the token that you're using if you're getting a push. And again, the IP address is the IP address of the authentication device, and then it's a location based on an IP lookup service again. You want to bring your employee phone book, again, that inventory. Mobile device asset inventory if you're issuing cell phones out to users, or are you allowing them BYOD with some level of registration or mobile device management. And then you want to have a kind of a basic understanding of phone number country codes and locations and things like that. And then the caveat here is bring your own device or open enrollment. If you're not keeping track of that at all, you're going to have no idea what's coming in here is normal or not. And then remember that pushes and codes don't require cellular. You can get a push over Wi-Fi, and if you're getting authentication codes out of the application itself, that doesn't require cellular, so you're not going to get an IP. Sometimes you might not even get a phone number, just that they use the app to do that. So we're going to go hunting in the authentication device data. And we're going to take a look at a mismatched the access. So here in this log, we see that the authentication device was located in California, but that access device or that laptop that was trying to log in is saying that it was in Moscow. So we're going to take a look at that one a little bit more. The other thing that you want to take a look at is multiples, and I'm going to get into that. We'll do a deep dive into that here with multiple users on one phone number. So we're going to dig into these a little bit more. Here we have 6 users that are all using one phone number and one extension. And we're going to take a look at those users a little bit more, those help desk agents. They all have the same manager and the same hire date. And we're going to go ahead and call that number because that's kind of interesting that they're using an extension. And it turns out that it plays a tone. And when we look up that tone, it's pressing the number 1. So the outgoing voicemail message on that extension, it goes straight to voicemail and then just plays the number 1 to accept our MFA. So we have 6 people just automatically accepting MFA. So we're going to have some emails with the manager, and what's going on? Oh, it turns out it's a secure building. They can't use mobile. They can't use any sort of other devices. But you know what? We're going to issue them some hard tokens so that they aren't just using the same extension and bypassing MFA completely. So next one, we're going to investigate a little bit more. We're taking a look at Grace's landline. She's named it for us, so that's nice. We have 3 people here, and they all have 3 different job titles, which is kind of interesting. We're going to look into this a little bit more. And it turns out that Grace is with laptop support, and she's doing some shadow IT to do her job here. So instead of going about calling up Trudy or Frank, she's actually adding her phone to their systems and knowing their passwords so that she can go in and make changes to their account and set up laptops and stuff for them while they aren't there. While they're out on lunch, she can log in and set up those laptops. Turns out that the timestamps on those login match the time frames of her support tickets. So again, having your support ticket system so you can go back and cross-reference that. And we're going to confirm that there's a password change on all of those users, and we're going to remove Grace's landline from those other users because that shouldn't be happening. And then we're going to have a conversation with her management and make the support process more secure, make sure that they shouldn't be doing things like that. It is kind of nice. And you do notice that people can in some of these systems, people can label their phone numbers. So one of the things that I did when I first started digging around in the logs was I threw in an Easter egg, and anybody that goes in and tries to look at my logs, they're going to see that I always log in from a banana phone. So you can look looking at that. The next example here is one user, multiple phones. And again, I wrote this talk in November 2019. You might remember something that happened in December 2020, where FireEye was able to detect an attacker in their system when they noticed a second phone on an employee's MFA. So it was added to that. But if you aren't keeping track of new devices that are being added or you have a history, we're going to go into how do you hunt for that after the fact if you're not getting those alerts real time. So we're going to dig into this a little bit, and we're going to do this one as benign. We see that we have the mobile inventory, and we have her work phone number. And if you take a look at those a little bit closer, we do have 3 phones there, but one of them has been named. So Alice previously had an unlabeled cell phone. Alice got a new iPhone, so cool, congratulations. The MFA system had a code update, so when she added that phone, it decided to tag on iPhone for us to try to be helpful. So she installed MFA on the new phone, which caused the MFA system to relabel it. So that's benign. All those phones are accounted for. We're going to investigate this one a little bit more because this is interesting. We see that we have a mobile number and a work number on file for him, and then we have these 5 other phones. And Bob's login phones don't match the company records, so this is starting to look weird. The logins happen at all hours of the day. He's logging in at 1 a.m., he's logging in at 1 p.m., he's logging in just all different hours of the day. We're going to contact Bob's manager about this and try to see what's going on. And it turns out he was outsourcing his work to other contractors, and they had his password and added all their phones to his account. Bob's doing the work of 5 people because he is 5 people. So now I'm going to kind of get into like some gray areas and beyond the technology. You have restricted areas and skiffs, and like how do you compensate and work around that? The whole thing of like, oh, they're going to an extension. Have a plan to like issue YubiKeys or one-time passwords, password tokens if those are acceptable in those areas. The other thing is contractors. A lot of times contractors are given expectations of employees, but they aren't given the permissions and abilities to do things that employees are able to do. So make sure that you level set those so that contractors aren't trying to use credentials of employees in order to just do their job. And then the last one is assistance. And what I mean by this is for the call for papers for this conference even, they understand the concept that people have administrative assistants or people that help them out with different things. There are lots of applications that don't understand this concept. So if you have somebody that has an assistant, how do they log in as that person in order to assist that person with their job? It's amazing how many people don't understand delegation in applications and are logging into the higher level person that they are assisting. So be on the lookout for that. And then I'm going to get into the actions that you can take back with you. Is go out and respond to findings. Limit self-enrollment. I've kind of made that clear where it's like, hey, if you let people add other devices, they will. If you don't explain to them how backups work, you might see things like, oh yeah, I added my spouse's phone to my account because if I lose my phone, I can use my spouse's phone. What, is that allowed? Maybe think about limiting self-enrollment. You might want to limit or just not have phone call authentication. It's one of those things where you don't have to unlock the phone. So if somebody loses their laptop and their phone is also in their backpack, they now have access to the second factor with a phone call without having to do anything else to get into that. If you do have the phone call, you might want to change the default number on that. The group there that was able to play the tone in the voicemail, they knew that it was always going to be like the number 1 to accept that push. Just change that up every so often so you have to actually listen to the message in order to push the right number. And then be sure that you fix what you find. You find a lot of weird stuff. Just don't let it slide like, oh yeah, this is how IT has done it for 10 years, just logging in as other people to do their job. Like actually dig in and get through and do that. You want to be sure that you educate your users beyond the password policy, educate them about reporting fraud, educate them about not adding other phones and things like that. Let them, make sure that they understand to report those suspicious MFA requests and fraud. And let them know that it's okay to report user requests for sharing credentials. I had a situation where a contractor was being pressured by their management to share their credentials for the company in order to get their paycheck, because the manager who was not part of the contracting company, not part of the company, wanted to log in and basically scrape company data in order to do recruiting and things like that. But make sure that that users can report things, or hey, like this admin's away on vacation, share the password, share their credentials, and stuff like that. Make sure that can be reported and resolved. And then include contractors. I used to be a contractor, kind of treated like second-class citizens at some companies and stuff like that. You just want to be sure that you bring them along on security and making sure that they're following it correctly. And then some of the other MFA takeaways: do not set it and forget it. Go back, read your logs. Always read your logs. All systems read logs. Search for the unusual, figure out what normal is, and then find out what's not normal. Investigate the logs. I'm just going to keep hammering that. I love logs. Go out and just read them. Some of my future research that I want to do, I haven't done a whole lot on password lists, but I want to get into that. I want to do client-based authentication, more about token duplication. I want to take a look and see if people are sharing YubiKeys or tokens and stuff between users, not something I've really gotten into. And then just thanks to my employer for on-the-job research and training, the other security professionals that shared their stories with me, and I kind of mixed into some of these things, coworkers for my logging obsession and investigation and stuff. And then Duo has some pretty good documentation. If you want references, I'll leave the slide up for a minute. And that's it. If there are any questions.
Even better than I expected, and that means a lot. So really, really good. Questions?
For hunting through your logs and stuff, do you use any automated tools? Is it just kind of whatever the vendors provided for that, or did you write some scripts or something to flag like some of these interesting cases that might happen frequently?
Yeah, so I've written and set up like plays, like if you have a playbook and stuff, like writing up a bunch of Splunk queries or SEM queries that will go through and find certain things.
Thanks for a great talk. When the MFA that you have is not for the employees of the organization, but of your customers, like financial companies and stuff like that, do you think any of these analysis can be applicable to this situation?
Yeah, I think they could. If you were to like have those logs, it might be interesting to see if there are any customers sharing information. If you do have, I would think maybe like with the financial situation there, if there's any sort of fraud going on, like maybe you have multiple, like one phone on multiple users' accounts, there could be a situation of fraud going on there with customers.
Thank you.
Thanks for your talk.
Thank you.
So many of your examples were that showed that if we weren't using telephone PSTN as a second factor authenticator, these examples just wouldn't exist. And
Yep.
there's a cost associated with issuing an authenticator that's there's a cost associated with issuing a hard authenticator, but it seems like your time, or the time of the IT people, and the risk of loss would largely be subsumed by, would subsume the cost of those authenticators. Why can't we get away from that?
That is a fantastic question. I don't know. Like, why are the vendors still producing those sort of things? And I guess I was supposed to ask you who you are as well? Or?
Yeah. Jim, you need to say who you are.
I'm Jim Fenton. I'm one of the people. I'm a contractor. I work with NIST on user authentication guidelines.
Okay, cool. Yeah, yes. Please update the guidelines. Get rid of phones.
Jim has talked at PasswordsCon before, and he's one of those with his name on the SB 863B. Yeah. So, yeah. More questions.
What kind of training do we give users to educate them without getting too nitty-gritty or revealing security flaws in an existing system? How do we make that practical?
Yeah, some of the vendors do have some education, like when you first roll it out, and I think they are getting better at like education packages that you can use to like mail campaigns and things like that. Probably just being like a little bit transparent without making them like too curious. But yeah.
You had several examples in here, some of them crazier than others. Mm-hmm. What's the sort of craziest thing you've ever found? War stories from reality.
Yeah, some of those were not reality at all, and then some of them were. And I'm just gonna like leave that up to the imagination, which ones were and which ones weren't. Protect the innocent, maybe. So.
I think it's sort of time for me to do one of my stories, which is for real. I've told this one, I've included this in talks before, but there might be new people here as well. And this story is something that I did as a pen tester doing password cracking many years ago in a galaxy far, far away. And it's also very interesting to see how social and cultural differences play a role when I tell a story. Because together with a friend of mine, we did a penetration test, and we cracked the passwords of a lot of people. And there's a visitor for you here, Susan.
All right, so we had a really lovely... Is this on? Yep. Can you hear me? Yeah. We had a really lovely speaker request for all of the staff and volunteers at BSides to be excellent to each other so that we could be excellent to all the other participants. So with that in mind, it really touched us. We'd like to present you with something as a result.
Cool. Okay.
Thank you so much for coming and talking and being part of this.
Thank you, Demon. Yeah. So to continue my story, we were able to crack the passwords of approximately 5,000 people. That easy, Windows, a long time ago. And then we also found a Windows directory where we found pictures of all these people, like headshots being used for physical access cards. And this wasn't part of our assignment, but we had an evening where we were drinking beer, and I can't remember today who came up with the idea, but the idea was pretty simple. Do you think men or women have the best passwords? So we had 5,000 pictures, and we had 5,000 passwords. We put everything into a database, and then we spent a couple of days, 2 guys, analyzing pictures. And we looked at gender, which is, I should say, fairly easy to identify from pictures. We also identified if the person in the picture were using glasses and used that as a thing we could check for. We also looked at hair color, including no hair or gray or brown or black, and also facial hair. And when we had done that to 5,000 pictures, we could do queries into the database. And what did we find? Number 1, we found that women prefer length. Some people doesn't dare laugh, and mainly it is men laughing. There might be a few women as well. But this is about passwords. So we found that women on average had longer passwords than men. We also found that men prefers a wider selection in characters. They used more different letters from the alphabet and special characters and so on. And in Norway, at least in our culture, it's a thing that, and I'm sorry to say this, but blonde women are supposed to be just a little bit more stupid than everybody else. But blonde women didn't have the worst passwords. The worst passwords belongs to males that goes into the category of Unix guru. And that is a category we had to create based on hairstyle and beard style. So you can imagine the rest. They had the absolute worst passwords. And now the end of the joke, the person type with the best passwords were women with red hair. And that is something I just cannot understand due to my ex-wife being a redhead. And with that, thank you. And our next talk will be at 3 o'clock, so be back then. Thank you.